And we're recording. Welcome once again, Shabbat Shalom to everybody. This is our site at moon.com. I'm Joe Dumont, and we have another guest speaker this week who's going to be teaching us about becoming his own. And I remember reading the notes, but I forgot what they were, so I'm looking forward to this again. We do this each week so that even though we're in lockdown, but more so because we're scattered around the world, we can come together, we can talk, we can share teachings, and the pressure's not only on me, but we have other people that can teach, who have good insights on different subjects, and that's what we've been doing. And this week we have, I believe, from Upper Michigan, Sal Alexander, and we're going to start with prayer, and then I'm going to throw it over to you, Sal. So, okay. Our Father Jehovah, it is a great honor to be able to be in your presence, to be able to keep your Shabbat, to have this time of fellowship with brethren from around the world, literally around the world. This is such an amazing time to be keeping your Shabbats in. And it's also a scary time because we see your hand out there right now, shutting people down with this pestilence. We pray, Father, that you be with us, be with our loved ones, keep us safe. We ask that you help us to turn the hearts of the people back to you so that they know it's you who's doing this and that they have to repent. We ask your blessing upon all of us, Father, to do that. We ask your blessing upon Sal today in her presentation and the technical side so that everything works. We just ask that you bless this day, and for the glory of your name, the name Jehovah, we give you thanks and praise. Amen. Okay, Sal, you have the mic.
Thanks. You can hear me, right?
Yes, Sal, do it. I was going to do, but I've lost my note. Do a little introduction, who you are, how you got to this walk, this way, and lead us into your teaching from there. So just do a little 5-minute bio, or okay?
Okay. I was raised in a traditional Lutheran family, and we were raised believing in the Old Testament and celebrating Sabbath on Sunday, but we did, no work and all of that. And so my walk was very slow. When I accepted him, I learned to know him personally when I was 16, just actually a few weeks before I was 16, actually on the 25th of April, just before I was 16. And a few years later, I was reading the preface and I learned that his name had been replaced in most of the books and is now the Lord in most of the Bibles. I continued to read his word and study and learn and grow. I was privileged to get to know a group of women who celebrated his feasts, not in a biblical way, but they at least acknowledged them, and we had meetings on those days, and they were women who were an amazing group. Most of them spent at least 4 hours with him each day. One woman, as soon as she dropped her children off, would spend time with him, and then at noon she'd open the church for the rest of us to come and spend the rest of the day until it was time for everybody to pick up kids. And I just was surrounded by people who loved him, who read his word, who knew him personally and knew how to study his word. So growing into this and keeping Torah was so gradual that for me, there really isn't a time where I can say, oh, I stopped this walk and started this walk. And it's only been recently when I've realized how far the church has gotten from the original teaching of the Reformation. So So a lot of this, pretty much most of what I'm going to be sharing is stuff that I have studied and learned, and it is kind of autobiographical. And to me, becoming his own has been key. For he calls us his bride. This will be in 3 parts. The first part is about his bride and the joy, and this one will be why we want to read his word, and it's not always what people think. And this one also has more stories and things, so kids, if you could pay special attention, and when we have the breaks, maybe you guys want to talk with your parents about what you learned and how you can apply the information. The next part will be about the bride and the covenant, and then the book of the covenant, which in the circles I've been has rarely been discussed, and I think there's an enormous amount of information there that is overlooked. And this part I would like to open up more like a midrash, a guided discussion. So I will be looking for people to read certain sections of the Book of the Covenant, which is in Exodus 21 through 23, and sharing what he shows you during this very short period of time. One of the major verses that was really important in my life was, "Brethren, count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations," which many translations call trials and troubles, and probably makes more sense in our day. And that we have some control, because we not only are in charge of our attitude with the all joy, but we also have to let patience have her perfect work. But the all joy was very prominent to me. And just to be clear, this is not what all joy looks like. And this is a much better picture of what all joy might look like. So when we're doing all of these troubles, he says the reason that we can have all joy is if we have his mind about what's happening to us and not our mind, because we can know that the reason these are happening is so that we can be perfect and mature and entire, complete, and wanting nothing, so that we can be all that he created us to be. What's so cool about this verse is he gives us a tool so that we can know where we are. So many times people think, oh, I'm so like the Pharisee praying that, I'm so religious. And here he's giving us a thermometer so that we can kind of test where we are. If we have challenges that really weren't on our list of things to do, is this our reaction or is this our reaction? And we can kind of judge where we are with him by how we react to the things he allows in our lives. And that can be very helpful for us as we learn that oftentimes trials show us not only our need for wisdom, but show us where our heart is. There was as we have the trials, a lot of times we'll notice that we just don't have a clue. And when we see that, he tells us to ask him, and it will be given to us. And I remember one specific trial that I had a brain injury, and I could see just fine, and I could walk just fine, but I couldn't tell where the ground was. I could see it, but I couldn't feel it. And for many months, and it may have been a couple of years, I had to walk with a walking stick to touch the ground so that I knew where to put my foot next. Now, for me, it was awesome because he gave me the wisdom to know that he was taking me, a very goal-driven person. If I didn't have a goal and know why I was doing things and have a reason to decide whether this was important or that was more important, I floundered. So for him to take me from a place where I had to see way far off to a place where I could live and be at peace if all he showed me was the next step. This is almost the way he had to do it. I don't know any other way that he could have given me the gift of being at peace if all I know is this is where my next step is supposed to go. So during that time, he just protected me and showed me through what his will was in all of this and what he was doing in my life. That as I kept reading, I noticed, and it's not going to the next page. All right. It says a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. One of the things that happened in the brain injury is I'd say one thing and do another, and it wasn't deceitful, it wasn't planned, it wasn't manipulating. I just didn't have a clue what was going to happen. It was as much a surprise to me as anybody else. It was almost like I was watching somebody else live my life. And it's like, what in the world are you doing? And I'm sure it was frustrating. I know it was frustrating for me, but I can't imagine how it must have been for the people around me when I say I'm going to do one thing and we're planning one thing and then everything changes all of a sudden with no understanding and with nothing. I cannot tell you how horrible it is to live a life like that. And it was so cool to, first of all, have a name for it, and second of all, have an accurate description. It really was like being a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed about, and I couldn't even feel that the wind was blowing. It was just happening. But once I had a name for it, and I saw how unstable it was, I continued to do research, like Joe's talking about, looking it up in Strong's, and I found out it was G1374. So I looked for other times where that might be used in his word, and it was used one other time, and it's the definition is that it's two, and it's not just minded. It means your soul, your life, your mind, your heart. It's derived from a root word that means breath. It means your very being is divided. As I continued to study, I learned that the entire book of Hosea is talking about a people whose heart is divided, and other translations would call it fickle, deceitful, false, devious, faithless. And I got a picture of how other people that were trying to relate to me during this time might view what was happening. And I did not want to be that person. I didn't want to be it because I hated it and I couldn't stand it, but I definitely didn't want to be it when I'm to be his, and this is what it looks like to other people. But what's also very cool is that this same verse has the cure. It says, draw nigh to him, purify your hearts. Hearts, but this is a mind thing. No, this is a being thing. Purify your hearts. Now I had another clue as to what I could do to help solve this issue. So I looked up purify, G48, and found this amazing verse that says, now, not just, 20 years from now you are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. And this one just blows me away, that the reason that he loved us and gave himself for us is that he might sanctify and cleanse us. He knows we have these divided hearts. He knows we love the world. He knows we love the work and the family and the hobby and the, on and on and on. And he's coming to cleanse us and wash us with the water of his word. It was so simple. All I had to do to be clean was read his word. Even a child can do that. There's a story that makes this even more clear. It's of a grandfather who wakes up early each morning. He sits at a kitchen table and he reads his old, worn-out Bible. And his grandson comes in one day and says, "Grandpa, I love you, and I want to be just like you, but I've tried to read the Bible, and I just don't understand it. I don't get it. And if I do understand it, I forget. What good is it to read the Bible?" And Grandpa went and said, "Look at those coal baskets over there. Go get one off the wall and go down to the pond and get me a basket of water." And the grandson kind of looks, what is going on? But he loves his grandpa, so he goes down and does it. He reaches into the pond, gets some water in the basket, and he comes back up into the house. Well, there's no water in the basket when he gets back. And Grandpa says, "That's okay. I know you can do better. Go down to the pond again and get me a basket of water." So he goes down again, and this time instead of just, moseying back up the hill to the house, he, runs a little bit, and he gets to the house, and there's still no water in the basket. He says, "You can do better. I know you can." So he goes again, and this time he's going to go deep into the pond to make sure that basket's really full of water. And he's going to run back to the house, and there's still no water. And Grandpa said, "I know you can do this, just one more time." So he goes down to the pond, goes really deep, gets it so full it cannot possibly hold anymore, and he runs as fast as he can back to Grandpa and says, "Grandpa, this is useless. I can't get a basket of water." And Grandpa says, "Look at the basket. It's not useless. What changed?" And the boy looks at it and goes, "It's cleaner." And the grandfather said, "That is the point of reading his word. Especially when you begin, it's not always about what you understand. It's not always about what you remember. It's not always about your mind. It's about your heart." When we are born, we do not understand, but our parents keep talking to us. And we kept listening. And slowly we began to recognize their voices. We began to understand. We began to speak, to ask questions, and develop a relationship. When we are born spiritually, it may be the same language, but we don't understand the Spirit yet. He will keep talking to us. If we keep listening, we will begin to recognize his voice, and we will begin to understand. We will begin to speak and to ask questions. And he has promised us that as we are clean by reading his word, that he has spoken unto us, that we will abide in him and he will abide in us, and we will bear much fruit. And that fruit will change our lives because it will be his love, his joy, his peace, his long suffering, patience and forbearance, his gentleness and kindness, his goodness, his faith and his faithfulness, his meekness, his temperance and his self-control we will be changed, and we will know goodness and righteousness and truth, and be able to prove what is acceptable, not to us or to anybody around us, but to him, to Jehovah himself. And we will be transformed by the renewing of our minds so that we might prove what is good and acceptable and his perfect will. He will be accomplishing his purpose in us. There was research that was done recently to discover what, if anything, of all the things that we do as an expression of our faith, had a positive impact on our spiritual growth. They used a statistically significant sample of thousands of people across all age groups and other demographic factors, and they defined spiritual growth as evidence of clear changes in our lives against 22 common sins like anger and immorality and gossip. And the results were startling and definitive. Out of 150 possibilities of things that they thought might possibly impact our spiritual growth, only one thing measurably and dramatically reduces the instance of sin in our lives, and that is the evidence of our spiritual growth. The correlation between that one thing and spiritual growth is stronger than the correlation between smoking and lung cancer. What is that one thing? That one thing is reading the Bible at least 4 times each week. But new habits don't always come easily. But the story that we just listened to has some clues. It says each morning. That means Grandpa had a routine. Grandpa was up early, means he set aside a time. He sat at the kitchen table. That means he had a place. And he read his old, worn Bible. That means he had a Bible that was probably full of notes. If we want to establish this in our lives, these are 4 basic things that help make that new habit easier. Now, frankly, I would also recommend that before you start reading, that you pray and ask him to help you understand. Some people use a plan to read his word. I like to start from the beginning and just go straight through. Some people read chronologically. Some people like a little bit of the Old Testament and a little bit of the New Testament, a little bit of Psalms, a little bit of Proverbs each day. They feel it's more balanced. But whatever you do, there are plans all over the internet. It's easy to find them. Especially when you're beginning, it may also be helpful to have a to-do list, because our brains, habits are hard. New habits are even harder sometimes to establish. And our brain will go, oh no, I can't do this. I've got to remember that I have to do, and it'll tell you all the things that you're supposed to be remembering to do today, so that you won't end up using all your time, worrying about those things and instead of spending time with him. Sometimes it helps to jot them down and say, okay, brain, got it. Thanks for reminding me. And then it's written down. Now be quiet and just go over to the side for a little bit and don't think about that stuff anymore. And let's focus on him. As we learn to read his word, he will talk to us. And it's helpful to have a journal with a pen to write them down, because sometimes the things that he tells us just are more than what can fit in a Bible. Sometimes it's more than what can fit into words, but it's helpful to write them down and at least try. As you grow, you may find that you want colored pencils. One of the first studies that I did was Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and I used purple for the Father and red for the Son and blue for the Holy Spirit, the temple colors. Joe mentioned also having a Strong's Concordance and a dictionary to look up words that we don't know. If you don't have those things, blueletterbible.org is one of the many Bible study tools out there that can help. Again, you can do a search to find out some of those things. But again, he promises if we take the time to do this and to develop this habit in our lives, our Father does keep talking. And if we keep reading and keep listening, we will begin to recognize his voice and we will begin to understand. How did we first learn to speak? We mimicked what we heard our parents say. I've heard people say they can't pray, but sometimes the best way to start is to pray his word. For instance, the verse we're talking about right now, we could pray, this is just an idea. It doesn't have to be these words. But dear Father, help me to count it all joy when trials and troubles come. Help me to know that you are stretching my faith that I might grow in patience. Help me to allow that growing patience to do what you intend in my life, that I might be mature, complete, lacking in nothing, and that I might be all that you created me to be. And then, as we continue to read his word, we will change. We will bear fruit. His fruit will be in us. And we will learn how precious it is that he loved us and gave himself for us. Can you imagine? He died for us so that he might sanctify and cleanse us, because he knows we have this problem of a divided heart, with the washing of his word, that he might present us to himself without spot or wrinkle, holy and without blemish, that we could be all he created us to be, which is his bride, because he wants so much to rejoice over us as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride. And the bride is mentioned several different places in his word. So one of the questions that I had as I was learning to read was, is this all this talk about the bride, is that just poetic language? It certainly could be. The Psalms shows that he definitely is a poet, but if it's not just poetic language, then marriage, even in our day, is a legal contract. He is the judge of all the earth, so he would certainly abide by the law. Then where is this contract? For certainly the judge of all the earth would do right. But before we get into that, I want to go back and say, count it all joy when you fall into temptations, knowing, and let patience have her work, knowing that there's a reason for this. Knowing that, yes, the trials show us our situation, they show us our heart, they show us that we're divided, we're not wholly his. These verses show us the problem, that we have a divided heart. They show us how to take our temperature so we have an idea of where we are. He gives us the cure, which is so simple. A child can do it. We just need to read. We talked about a method, which is setting up a routine. And the goal is that we could be his bride. Now, he also gives us a choice. He said, I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. And he urges us to choose life, that we would love him and obey him and cleave to him, because he is our life and he gave us our very breath. His word cleanses us, it transforms us, and his truth sets us free. What are we going to choose? I need to switch to section 2. And I would like, especially the children and the parents, to talk about what are the important things that this section had that we need to use in our lives. If you have somebody else with you, if you could talk about it a little bit. It shouldn't take me too long to transfer, but I haven't done this on Zoom before, so I'm not sure. But dear Father, help us to choose you. Okay. All right. The next section is about the covenant. And we're going to explore the idea of the bride of Christ.
Sal, we got nothing up here yet.
You can't see this?
No, all we have is your last screen from the last section.
Okay.
Which will you choose?
All right. Well, that's not a bad screen to have, but let me see if I can find Zoom.
I've got mine up.
Okay, I'm going to stop. Do you see something else besides that? Do you see questions?
I see it says the choice. Which will we choose?
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can start sharing again and see if it will change screens after that, okay?
Okay.
Thanks for letting me know. Okay, share screen. Okay. And
Is the bride of Christ Messiah just poetic language?
yeah.
Okay, you've got it.
I'm not sure I do, because that's not the screen I'm seeing.
The bride of Christ, the Messiah.
Okay, now I'm seeing it. Okay. All right, there we go. The covenant, you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for letting me know. I appreciate that. So going back to the verses that I was finding that were talking about us being his bride. And even though I was raised in a church where we took his covenant seriously, I missed the fact, I missed how serious it was and how, the importance of that document. And I came away with the impression that this was just poetic language. But as I was reading his word and I kept seeing him refer to us as wives and brides, I thought, it seems like there's maybe more to this than just poetic language. So I started looking through his word to find out which was true. And one of the first major clues that I had, and there were others, but Ezekiel 16 really hit home to me. And especially the first few verses, 3 through 8, is just this amazing story that Jehovah looks, we call it back into history, he calls it forward into history, and shares the beginning of the greatest love story of all time. And that's his own. And he starts that story by saying, Jehovah says to Jerusalem. And then he talks about the birth of his bride, how she grows, how she matures, and how she's finally ready for the covenant. So I thought, okay, if this is more than poetic language, then there should be some identifiable events that support all of these periods of time. And the first one's pretty obvious. Abraham was not in the land of Canaan, and Jehovah called him out to go to Canaan, that he could be a great nation and he'd bless him and that he'd bless all that blessed him. And Abraham obeyed and departed and did go into the land of Canaan. And this one I have a really, this is a little, one of those little rabbit trails, but it is so amazing. I can't let it pass, sorry. But one of the things that happened just before some major events in Abraham's life is that there were 4 kings. And some people believe that one of those kings was the ruthless Nimrod. And they are going on just a spree, a war. They're going to war against tribes of various giants, various tribes of giants around them. And they're attacking not only the giants, but the Amalekites that were so ruthless that they even attacked the children of Israel as they were coming out of Egypt. And the giants, just one of these tribes of giants was in the land, and the nation of Israel said, no, they're too big for us. We're like grasshoppers. And these 4 kings are declaring war on these giants and these Amalekites and fighting them. And while they're doing that, the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah and 3 other kings who have been under the rulership of these kings decide this is a good time to attack. You know, they're probably worn out from all this warfare, right? Makes sense. Well, they attack and they lose. 5 kings can't defeat these 4 kings. Somebody comes and tells Abraham, and Abraham with his 318 men and a couple friends travel over, it's 150 miles as the crow flies, travel over 150 miles to go to this war party and rescue all of the people and the goods from these 5 cities. And we don't hear anything, there's no Gideon thing, and the fleece, there's nothing. He just does it. That is amazing to me. And then after he comes back, he's risked his life, he's risked the lives of all of his men, he's traveled over 300 miles either on foot or on camel. This doesn't happen. It's not 150 miles, like we do. This is a long time. This took him days to get there. And then the king of Sodom says, just, take all the goods that were in our cities, and all we want is the people. And Abraham says to the king, I lift up my hand to Jehovah, the Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take anything. And he's so adamant, he gets very specific. I won't take a thread. I won't even take a shoelace. That just floors me, that he picked up with just over 300 men and even had the gumption, the thought that he could defeat these 4 kings when the 5 kings couldn't. But after this, Jehovah says to Abram, I am thy shield. I expect that Abraham already knew that, or he wouldn't have gone in the first place. And I am thy exceeding great reward. What we miss so often is that he is not only the giver, he is the gift. And not only did he promise that, but he promised what was dear to Abram's heart. He didn't have a son, and he promises it won't just be a son, but your seed will be so numerous that they'll be like the stars. And Abraham believed him, and Jehovah counted that for righteousness. And in doing that, Abraham, before he ever had a physical son, Abraham became the father of us all who walk in the faith of our father Abraham before he had a physical son. And then he goes on to tell Abraham a little bit about what's going to happen to the nation that will become his bride. He says that there'll be strangers and they will serve another land and they will come out with great substance and they will return to the land where you are now. And Jehovah made a covenant with Abraham that day, and that is the birth of the bride. And the bride grew and she multiplied. And we're told in Exodus that she increased abundantly, that she multiplied and waxed so exceedingly mighty that the land was filled with them. And now he passes by and sees that it's a time of love. How in the world do you define what a time of love is for a nation? So I looked back at a clue in Genesis where Jehovah said, "It's not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet for him." So Jehovah knows there's a problem. And what does he do? He solves it, right? Yeah, not yet. Out of the ground, he formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and then he brings them all to Adam to name them. This isn't a 3-minute thing. Think of how many beasts of the field and fowls of the air there are. Who knows how long it took him? Why would he do this? Because as Adam was naming them, he found out that they came in pairs and that he didn't have a mate. That was the time of love. That was when Jehovah made the woman and brought her to him. So we can know that when we have a need, he already knows it. It's when we trust him that we are ready to receive whatever he has for us, however he chooses to give it to us. That's the time of love. So in the story of the bride in Exodus, he tells us first of the story of Moses. And as soon as Moses leaves the scene in verse 22, he says, "It came to pass in the process of time that Israel sighed and they cried." They knew they had a need. And he heard them and remembered them and looked to them and had respect to them. And he sent Moses and Aaron to them. And they spoke all the words which Jehovah had spoken. And they did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed and bowed their heads and worshiped. When we know we have a need, we can also know that he has met it. Exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think or imagine, because he not only told them that he understood where they were and he would deal with that, but he said, "I will take you to me for a people. I will be to you a God, and you shall know me. You shall know that I am Jehovah." Again, he is the giver, but he is also the gift. And on top of that, he said, "The Egyptians shall know that I am Jehovah as well." So he knows it's their time of love. So he takes them out of Egypt, right? No, we know the story better than that. There are the plagues, first the blood. And Moses and Aaron tell them, "This is so that you shall know that I am Jehovah. But the Egyptians mimic. They can't do exactly the same thing because the land, the water, all the water in the land has already been turned to blood, but they can mimic it. Then the frogs come, that thou mayest know that there is none like Jehovah. And the magicians mimic it again. This time, Moses and Aaron don't say why the plague is coming, but the lice and the gnats or the mosquitoes, depending on your translation and what language you're in. This time, Moses and Aaron don't have to say it because the magicians say it. Said, this is bigger than us. This is bigger than anyone we worship. This is bigger. This is the finger of God. And from there on, it changes. Once the heads of the Egyptians understand this is different. This is Jehovah that we're dealing with. This isn't, these other deities that we're used to dealing with. Everything changes. Now, he said, I won't just say that I am Jehovah. I will show that I am Jehovah, because I will separate my people and they won't experience the plagues anymore, that thou mayest know that I am Jehovah. And so his people don't experience the rest of the plagues. But in plague 7, with the hail and lightning, something new happens. It records to us that he that feared the word of Jehovah among the servants of Pharaoh, these are the common people, the Egyptians that are the common people, made his servants and his cattle flee into the houses. It's not only the magicians anymore, it's even the common people are beginning to understand that he is worthy to be praised. And at the end of this all, they were so urgent. They knew Jehovah was not like their gods. They were so urgent that they practically pushed the people out of Egypt, and they gave them jewels of silver and gold and raiment. And the Israelites didn't even have to go to war to take their stuff. The Israelites spoiled the Egyptians of their own free will, because the Egyptians knew that Jehovah, he alone was God. But there were other Egyptians who were even more convinced. And when the children of Israel journeyed out of Egypt, those people, that mixed multitude, went with them. But we forget that they were there, because one law was to all of them. To the one that was homeborn, the one who was of the seed of Abraham, the physical seed of Abraham, and to the stranger that sojourned among you, the one that was of the spiritual seed of Abraham, that believed. One law was to them both. So we don't hear about, the children of Israel and the Gentiles that traveled with them. We hear about the children of Israel. And then in the 3rd month, Jehovah called Moses out of the mountain, saying, thus shalt thou say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel. The most amazing thing. He said, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians. He's saying that the most powerful nation on the earth, that were your brutal slave masters, I'm bigger than them. I can protect you from them. I protected you in the past. I protected you from the Amalekites. I can protect you in the future. You saw how I bore you on eagle's wings. I provided you. I went before you in the pillar of cloud and fire. I protected you from the Egyptians with a pillar of fire. I gave you precious water from the rock to drink when you were thirsty, and the bread of angels to eat in the middle of a wilderness where there was no food. I provide for you. I have in the past, and I will in the future. And I brought you unto myself. These are not empty words. I have proven the truth of these words in all I have done for you. I love you. Now, therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar, which means my own special treasure unto me, above all people, for all the earth is mine. And ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Amazing. And then he tells Moses, go call the elders of the people. And Moses laid this proposal before them, and he told them all the words which Jehovah had commanded him to say. And all the people answered, all that Jehovah hath spoken, we will do. And the time of love became the time of preparation. And Moses is told to set the people of Israel apart, to sanctify them, to have them wash their clothes and prepare to actually meet him on the third day. We take things so lightly because we're used to being able to talk to God and have him walk with us and communicate with us. But that's not how people then thought. They believed that he was so completely full of awe that if anyone was allowed to see or hear him, they would die. So this was no ordinary meeting. The Creator himself was coming to meet with them. And it came to pass on the third day in the morning that there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud upon the mount, and the voice of the trumpet exceeding loud, and the Mount Sinai was altogether in a smoke, because Jehovah himself had descended upon it in fire. The Creator himself descends upon Mount Sinai with trumpets declaring the arrival of his awesome majesty, and Mount Sinai still is black with the fire of his presence. And when the voice of the trumpet sounded long and waxed louder and louder, Moses spake, and he answered him by a voice, and he began the covenant. It's not only that he descended from his heavenly throne to appear upon the earth, or that he himself speaks to the entire nation. This in time and in space, the Almighty Creator of all humbles himself to descend upon Mount Sinai to speak to every man, woman, and child of the entire mixed multitude that was the nation of Israel. Over 1 million people, and each one could personally hear his voice. That he descended, that he spoke to the entire nation. These are amazing. But there is nothing when we consider what he spoke and the reason for his coming. Words cannot describe how far beyond our ability it is to think or even imagine his thoughts and his plans, his love for us. He spoke, I am Jehovah, thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. We know that the reformers understood the importance of this because our marriage vows are modeled after this. We say traditional Protestant vows are I, and you say your name, take thee, saying, for my lawfully wedded, here, I, Jehovah thy God, which have brought thee Israel out of the land of Egypt. He begins us. Our wedding vows are modeled after this. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. He's already promised in his proposal that ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me, my very own precious jewel, above all people. Now he's asking us to promise the same by forsaking all others. Thou shalt not take the name of Jehovah thy God in vain, for we are called by his name. And it's here where he gave us his name, just as the groom gives his bride his family name. Here, Jehovah gives us his. We're to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, because we're his set apart people. With this ring I thee wed, I pledge myself to you. My Sabbath ye shall keep as a sign, just like the wedding ring, between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am Jehovah that doth sanctify you. I am the one who set you apart unto me. And again, this will be a sign that you might know that I am Jehovah. I am the one that sanctifies you. And to sanctify means to be set apart, to be consecrated, to be hallowed, just like he consecrated, set apart, and hallowed that day, the seventh day. This is showing us that he keeps his promises, that we are a peculiar treasure unto him, his own very precious one, above all the people of the earth, that we are to him a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, a set apart nation, set apart to him. And again, as we keep his set apart, his Sabbath, as he has already done, that will be a sign to us, just like the wedding ring is to a husband and wife, that you may know that I am Jehovah. It's a reminder that he pledged himself to us, and we pledged ourselves to him. This ring, this sign, the Sabbath day is not just any day. He created and set apart this day, the very first day that we met him. And he's been waiting patiently for our time of love. This is better than an engagement ring that's been handed down for 5 generations. He waited for centuries upon centuries to give this to us. He pledges himself to us, and he asks us to love him with all our heart and with all our soul and with all our might. What we have so often and so flippantly called his law is his love, and we miss it. What will our response be to his love? What is amazing to me is that after he spoke the 10, we stopped him. They lived to tell the story of their encounter with him, but they didn't comprehend this expression of his unfathomable love, which was evidence that he himself at the core of his being was love. Their first reaction after he spoke was, "No, let not God speak to us lest we die." And he responds, remember, I have talked with you from heaven. Can you imagine a wedding ceremony where a bride does that to a human groom who has just pledged himself to her, and she stops the whole wedding before she responds? I don't think the wedding would continue. But this is not Jehovah. He said to Moses, "Come up to me. I will talk with you, And Moses came, he wrote down all those words, and then he told them to the people. And then the people answered, we do. And then he wrote all of those words in a book called the Book of the Covenant. And he read the book to the people. And again, they said, we do. And with that, we became his. And what's the next thing he does? He gave Moses instructions to build the tabernacle that he might live among us as a husband lives with his wife. So, is this language about the bride just poetic language? Or is there a contract? Is there a covenant? I believe that Ezekiel answers that, and that it may be talking in poetic language, but there is real life events to say that this is a real covenant, not just poetic language. But how important is this covenant? He tells us to prove all things. And he implies that if we don't know if there's a deity, then we should look to nature. In Romans, he says, for the invisible things of him, his attributes and his qualities, from the creation of the world, that's time, are clearly seen, being understood by the things that were made, which is space, the things we can touch. His eternal and everlasting power and his divine nature are displayed in nature. If we don't know that there's somebody bigger than us, we look to nature, we study nature, and if our hearts are open, we will understand that this is way bigger than us. And then he tells us that if we don't know which of all the deities, millions of deities that claim to be deities, if we don't know who the one who is worthy of praise is, he tells us to ask. He says, ask now of the days that are past, which were before thee. That means the days that you can see. Since the day that he created man upon the earth through all of time, ask from one side of heaven unto the other, from what throughout the entire world, that space in history, what are we to ask? We're to ask if there has ever been any such thing as this great thing, or even have been heard, if there's any rumor of a great thing happening like this, where a people, not just one person, because lots of people claim to hear him, but where a people, an entire nation hears the voice of God speaking out of the midst of a fire and they live to tell about it, or where a God has taken him a nation from the midst of another nation in the same way, in the same might and power that I myself have taken you. And I did this, that thou mightest know that Jehovah, I am God. That's why he showed it to us, that we would know that Jehovah, he is God in heaven above and earth beneath. There is none else. That's why he made us to hear his voice. Upon the earth, we heard his words. And he brought us out with his mighty power out of Egypt, so that not only us, but so anyone in the world who wants to know can know. They can look into time and space and know who alone is worthy to be praised. This story is how we know that Jehovah alone is worthy of worship. It is this covenant that is the foundation for our relationship with him as his bride. So, what is in the Book of the Covenant? That's the next section, and I'll tell you it's far more than we ever imagined. Now, while I take a break to switch slideshows, if you guys could get your Bibles and notebooks and get ready to volunteer, and we'll have a little bit of guided discussion time, I would really appreciate it. I will be back shortly, hopefully faster than last time. I think I have to stop sharing the screen, right?
Yep. Stop sharing,
Okay.
then come back in.
Okay, and then share screen in the Book of the Covenant. Okay.
The book of the
Who's here?
covenant, learning to discern his will.
Yep, yep.
Whoops, what did I just do? Hang on, Sal, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay, I hit the wrong button. Scared myself. Okay, it's all yours, Sal. Go ahead.
Okay, now in this section, in a little bit, we'll need to open it up so other people can do too, but at the beginning, I'm kind of setting things up. So we know that when we were born spiritually, we didn't understand, but our Father keeps talking to us anyway, and if we keep listening, we will begin to recognize his voice. We will begin to understand and to speak and to ask, and that it's as simple as reading his word. We know that to have that be a habit in our lives, we need a routine, we need a time, a place, and his word. And in time, we will begin to recognize his voice and to understand. And as we mimic what he says in his word, as we pray his word, we'll begin to speak his word on our own, and we'll even learn to ask questions. And some of the key questions that we need to learn to ask are who, what, when. I learned it who, what, when, why, where, and how, but that's not always the order we learn to ask them in. And that as we ask questions, we will be transformed so that we can prove what is the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. As we go into the book of the covenant, we have to start understanding that Jehovah formed man from the dust of the ground. And we do what we do best, and we create division. So there are at least 4 different ways that people have decided. When I grew up, men was generic. I'm not used to this gender stuff yet. But there are at least 4 different ways where people have taken Exodus 21 through 17 and divided them into 10 different parts. Well, frankly, how do you know which one of these 4 different ways is correct? Which 10 are his 10 that he's talking about? And I don't want to go out and get all these theology things, because man, we're rational. We always have these excuses for why our way is right, and they all sound great, but if it's not him, it's not his truth, then who cares? So what I wanted to do was to remember that just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so his ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. So usually it's best to allow him to explain what we're supposed to be learning. So I took the 10, I took all the different variations of what the 10 were, and I wrote them down. And then I went back to the book of the covenant, because after the 10, remember, we stopped him and we wouldn't let him speak, and we told him that we wanted him to speak to Moses. So Moses wrote the book of the covenant, and it's my guess that the book of the covenant is pretty closely related to the Decalogue, to the 10. So I just thought I'd, see where it went. Now here is where I need volunteers. So could I have ideally at least 2 people to kind of take each one of these sections. And Randy, can you
We
see
have
who's
volunteers
volunteering?
for you.
Pardon?
We have 3 volunteers for you so far. So-
Okay, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7. So I'd like to have 14 if we could. I'd like to have at least 2 for each one, if that's possible.
Sounds good. We can, we'll get started and I'll keep asking.
Okay, okay. So I put the Book of the Covenant, the sections of the Book of the Covenant on one side, and figured that if this was important, if it was an important one of the 10, that these sections would reference it in some way. And as I read those, I found that was true, that the first part talked mostly about verse 2, and the second part talked mostly about 13 and so on. And as I went through, verse number 4 did not have any reference, any direct reference in the Book of the Covenant. And I noticed that 12 and 17 didn't either, which was interesting to me. So I took out 4 because I knew that if there wasn't a reference. And now we have a pattern where we have 4 that are referenced, 1 that's not, 4 that are referenced, 1 that's not. That is not the way a lot of people divide it up, but it seems to me that that's a pattern that would be consistent with a logical God. So I put it down as 5 and 5. And as I did that, I read what his son had to say about it. And it says that there's one, the great commandment, thou shalt love Jehovah thy God with all thine heart and with all thy soul and with all thy might, which we referenced in the previous section. And the second was to love your neighbor. And it looks like, in general, the first column looks like we're to love Jehovah, and the second column in general looks like we're to love our neighbor. But there's this one at the bottom that a lot of people put in the other hand. Because the pattern is the way the pattern is, I kept it here for now. We'll see as we go along if we think it might belong someplace else. And we'll talk, and maybe we'll have time to talk about it later, maybe not, we'll see. So as we summarize these, we see that love is the key and that he is love. So we come back to, not just from the covenant point of view, but just from a subject matter point of view, we come back to his law is love. His law, and it's not just his law is love. His very nature is love. So what we call his law is his love. It's his nature revealed. And as we go back again to the Book of Covenant that Jehovah gave to Moses, Jehovah also told him that he was to take these things and teach them. Well, I've been a teacher, and I know that typically with teachers, you try to start at the beginning and then you go on down. So you kind of expect Jehovah to say, okay, we'll talk about verse 2, then we'll talk about verse 3, then we'll talk about verse 7, and we'll just take these in sequential order. But that's not the way it happened. The first thing he talks about is verse 2, then he talks about 13, then 15, then 3, 14, and 3, then verse 16, then verse 8, and then verse 7. What in the world? He is the supreme teacher. He is logical. He's a God of order. What is going on? So I put these at the top, put the 10 at the bottom, and started looking at them. And I noticed that he goes from 2 to 13. Well, 2 to 13 are a row. It's looking like a spreadsheet. Then 15, yeah. But then there's 3, 14, and 3, 3 and 14 and 3. That's another row. And then 16 and 8, another row. This is a spreadsheet. We are used to thinking of them as columns. We're not used to thinking of them as rows. What is he trying to tell us? Let's start out. Do we have volunteers for Exodus 23, 1 through 9 and 10 through 19?
Hugo.
Hugo, can you read? Remember, when we're doing this, we're not trying to see what color the pebbles are. We're trying to see the lay of the land. Okay? Can you read 23, 1 through 19, 1 through 9 first, please? And give us your insights. What's he trying to tell us? What's the big picture?
And thou shalt not raise a false report. Put not thine hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou speak in a cause that decline after many to wrest judgment. Neither shalt thou countenance a poor man in his cause. If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. If thou see the ass of him that aided thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. Thou shalt not wrest the judgment of thy poor in his cause. Keep thee far from a false matter, and the innocent and righteous slay thou not, for I will not justify the wicked. And thou shalt take no gift, for the gift blinded the wise, and perverted the words of the righteous. Also, thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Egypt.
What is the major idea? And this can be, Hugo, this can be for you if we want to open it up to other people. What's the major idea of this?
Think before speaking.
Oh, good one. Yeah. Anybody else?
Reflect your thoughts.
Yeah.
Can you say the first part again, Hugo? I did not hear you. I'm sorry.
Think before speaking.
Oh, okay.
I would say have integrity.
Yeah, I think that's good. Anything else?
Looking out for your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be lying to each other.
Yeah.
Probably is saying righteous judgment.
Yes. Yes.
Showing love your enemy.
It's interesting to me that he even goes so far as to say that our relationship with an enemy should not affect how we treat his ox or his donkey.
Or his flesh even.
That's true.
This appears to be a pretty good synopsis of the second commandment, how we treat each other.
Okay. But I would agree with that, but there's also this false report and the idea of judgment that we don't prefer in the first part. We don't, let's see, where's my little pencil? There we go. I didn't turn the pencil on, I guess. That we don't prefer a poor man And we also don't despise the poor man, that his condition shouldn't affect our judgment. The other thing it spoke to me about is the multitude, is thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil. It seemed like this was not just about an individual relationship, but it was more about a society. To me, this is talking more like, yes, we watch what we say and how we're, the influence we have, but if everybody on Facebook is condemning a thing that nobody knows anything about, but somebody just got on a tangent, we're not supposed to jump in and do that. So to me, this was not just it is individual, but not just individual. To me, it was broader. I also think the false and the judgment part of it are important. So let's go to the next one. The next one's related to remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. We're to be set apart.
Sally, can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Okay, you got me confused here when you back with all these other numbers, and I'm trying to fit Exodus 23 into your numbers with Exodus 20, and you got me confused. I'm sorry, I lost your train of thought here. So, and if it's me, maybe others are thinking the same thing. That's why I'm speaking up. So
I would agree. Yeah, I agree.
So
okay.
Explain to me again, how are you connecting Exodus 23 back to Exodus 20?
Can you see this on your screen?
Yeah.
Can you see the 10 with white and gold with 3 columns?
So you got Exodus 23, 1-9, and you got 16 there. What's the 16? 16
is, if you go down the list, it's verse 16 on Exodus 20. Thou shalt not bear false witness.
Okay. Now, okay, I got you now. That's where you lost me. Where are all these numbers coming from?
Yeah,
okay.
These are verse numbers. I decided to do it by verse numbers because when I started out, I didn't know what commandment numbers to put with them. And it just seemed, if I was doing verses and was consistent with the verses, that would make, that would be flow better.
So Exodus 23, 1-9 that we just read, that Hugo just read, you're connecting back here to Exodus 20, verse 16.
Yes.
You shall not bear a false witness against your neighbor. Okay, yes. And then beside that, you got 13, thou shalt not kill, on your chart here.
On my chart here, where? What chart?
The one that you got displayed here, you got Exodus 23, 1-9. Then you got 16, which is tying it back to Exodus 20. But then beside that, you got thou shalt not kill.
Oh, okay, I see what you're doing. All right, the first 2 columns go together, and there should be a line there. And then the others, so this is like a child's, you draw a line from one to the other, but I couldn't draw lines and have it make sense. So,
okay.
The book of the covenant is in white. The covenant itself, the Decalogue, is in yellow. And then the numbers next to the book of the covenant are the verses that the book of the covenant refers to, that's in that 3rd column. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand now what you're doing. When you pulled this up, I couldn't figure this out, and I've been stuck here since. So, okay, I think I got you now.
Okay. So now that makes more sense, now does this make more sense? So when I put 2 back here at 21, 1-11, that first part of the book of the covenant refers to verse 2. Exodus 21, 12-36 refers to verse 13 in Exodus 20. So I took these 2, 13, 15, and then I put them here, 2, 13, 15. And now, because to me, a teacher would go 2, 3, 7, 8, right? if you were teaching these, if the point of the Book of the Covenant is to teach these, it would make sense to start out at verse 2 and then go to verse 3, and then go to verse 7, then go to verse 8. Right?
Okay, yeah,
Okay, but that's not what the Book of the Covenant does. It talks about 2 first, and then it talks about 13.
okay.
So it's talking about it's not just columns anymore, it's talking about rows.
Yeah, I'm the guy at the back of the class with that dunce cap on in the corner. So,
Oh, I'm glad you're here, because if somebody doesn't understand, usually a whole bunch of people don't understand. So thank you so much for being
stupid. Thank you.
letting me know. But does this make sense now?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so that to me was a revelation that number one, the way he divides up the 10 is different than the way I was taught to divide up the 10. And that he is teaching, the supreme teacher is teaching them by rows and not sequentially. To me, there's a reason why he's doing it. He doesn't do things with no reason. So we're going through, and we started at the last row that is discussed in the Book of the Covenant, which is remember the Sabbath and don't bear false witness. And we're reading the sections of the Book of the Covenant that discuss those. So first we read 23, 1 through 9. And the next one, which discusses verse 16 in Exodus 20. And now we're going to read 23, 10 through 19, which discusses verse 8, which is remember the Sabbath. Okay, does anybody else need explanations before we go forward? Okay.
Just so everyone knows, yeah, I was a little bit confused there. Please, we're here. Sal's here. I'm here. We're all here to learn. So don't be afraid to speak up if you don't understand. This is what she's here for. She's trying to help us understand something, which I think is valuable. So don't be afraid to say, "Can you go over that again?" We got all day to do this. There's no rush. Okay, so don't be shy, is what I'm saying.
Thank you. Yes, please. And I know this isn't the way things are normally taught in the churches that we came out from, but to me, I have learned so much by looking at what we know so well. We almost don't even ask questions about it before. We just kind of go, oh, yeah, I know about that. But he has so much hidden in here that we haven't even begun to address yet. But we do have to look at it from a higher level. We can't be looking at little stones and pebbles. Okay, so this part to me talks about don't bear false witness, because the false report and a false matter is talking about how we treat people as groups, as mobs, as social media, Twitter and Facebook and all of that. But again, to me, it's not just about people. It's about what they own too, the things that are important. And that's a whole other question. Why is he throwing it in the guy's ox when most of it's talking about people? There's so many questions. But according to the way he wrote the Book of the Covenant, this is somehow related to keeping the Sabbath holy. So let's read the section on Exodus 23, 10 through 19, which deals with keeping the Sabbath holy. Who is reading that?
Yohanan, will you read this, please?
Oh,
And remember,
yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. Would you mind if I use a different translation? Because the King
no,
James
that's fine.
is a tongue
That's
breaker
fine.
for me, anyways. All right, so we're reading from the scriptures. Verse 10. And for 6 years you are to sow your land and shall gather its increase. But the 7th year you are to let it rest and leave it. And the poor of your people shall eat. And what they leave, the beasts of the field eat. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive yard. 6 days you are to do your work, and on the 7th day you rest, in order that your ox and your donkey might rest, and the son of your female servant and the sojourner be refreshed. And in all that I have said to you to take the heed, and make no mention of the name of your mighty ones. Let it not be heard from your mouth. 3 times in a year you are to celebrate a festival to me. Guard the festival of Matzot, or unleavened bread. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, at the time appointed in a new moon of Aviv. For in it you came out of Egypt, and do not appear before me empty-handed. And the festival of harvest, the first fruits of your labors, which you have sown in the field, and the festival of the ingathering, at the outgoing of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. 3 times in a year you are to Three times in the year all your males are to appear before the Master Jehovah. Do not slaughter the blood of my slaughterings with leavened bread, and the fat of my festivals shall not remain until morning. Until where? 19, right, sorry. Verse 19, bring the first of the first fruits of your land into the house of Jehovah your Elohim. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk.
What is the overarching topic? How is this related to keeping the Sabbath?
Well, Saoirse talks about the 6 years.
Mhm.
Well, this is what I talked about as well a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago.
Yes,
Like
yes.
6 years, about a sabbatical year. 6 years you are to work your field, and the 7th year you let it rest.
Mhm.
The direct comparison to the weekly Sabbath.
It's interesting to me that only one verse is directly talking about the 7th day and the weekly, and everything else is talking about sabbatical years and feasts. And if we're connecting the book of the covenant to his commandments, I think it's almost impossible not to get the idea that the feasts and the sabbatical years are part of the 10. If you think the 10 are important, then that includes everything, not just not just a weekly Sabbath.
Hey,
Agreed.
Sal,
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt your teaching, but is this sort of open up for a discussion here? Is that what you're doing now?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm going to jump in because I'm starting to get excited here.
Good.
Because I'm starting to see what you're saying. So you're connecting the holy days with being a false witness. Is that what you're
Yes.
doing?
Well, I think that's what he's telling us to do. I think that's what he's telling us to do back here. When he writes the book of the covenant, first he talks about bearing false witness, and then immediately after that, he talks about the Sabbath. I think that that's what he was telling us to do when he's treating this as a spreadsheet and not just columns. Is I think he's telling us that there's an important connection here that I want you to get, but it says it's the glory of Jehovah to hide a thing, and it's the honor of kings to dig it out. I think this is one of the treasures that he wants us to dig out, and he left enough clues there to say, yeah, there's treasure here, go dig.
Okay.
And I'm trying to say, yeah, I think we need to dig here.
So at the risk of trampling your presentation, what is the connection, or are you about to go there?
Well, I'm asking what, the way I'm doing this is I want to talk about each one of the rows that is obvious and see where we go with it.
Okay, well, you got me excited. I'm trying, and now that I've made this connection, okay, I'm anxious. Okay, go.
Okay. But we got to go through some other rows first, because
Okay,
how they relate to each other and build on each other that tells us what the relationship might be, I think. Right now, there, okay, so here we were. So why would, since Joe brought it up, why would keeping the Sabbath have anything to do with the previous one, which was about the false report and how we treat and our mouths, what we say, think about what we do, our judgment, how we make judgments. And judgment here is, I think, like the council of judgment and stuff, when you're going to court. So I think this is a bigger, broader, more society type of thing. How would the Sabbath day relate to this?
Can I say something?
Yes.
Hello.
It's a day to rest. It's a day to shut our mouth and think about what we say.
Yes. Yes.
Study to try to say what he says.
Yes. Yes. Because he is truth.
And Shabbat is our witness. So we actions speak louder than words. So we bear a witness by keeping Shabbat.
I think that witness is a critical piece, that we're to have a witness, a silent witness, as we keep Sabbath. But I think he's also telling us that we're to have a true witness as we relate to other people too. Because he's saying, don't do a false witness. Well, then what are we supposed to do? It's supposed to be true if it's not supposed to be false. So I think the witness is key here. I heard somebody else in the background.
That was me. It's Lindsay.
Okay.
Hi. Jehovah led me to Exodus 23 last night, so I find it really amazing.
Cool.
This is what you're teaching. Something that popped out at me last night was, so in Exodus 23 verse 10, it says, for 6 years you are to sow your land and gather the increase, but during the 7th year you are to let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor among your people may eat. Whatever they leave behind, the animals of the fields may eat. You are to deal with your vineyard and your olive grove in the same way. You are to do your work for 6 days, but on the 7th day you will rest, so that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and also the son of your handmaid and the outsider may be refreshed. And something that stood out to me in that is that where he says, you are to let your land lie fallow and rest, so that the poor among your people may eat. And then in this, where he speaks of the Sabbath, you are to rest so that the son of your handmaid and the outsider may be refreshed. And then it also, and you mentioned the verse about how to treat outsiders. And I wonder if all of verse 23 might be referring to how we treat, like with the false report, how we treat people, about mercy. Because he links the Sabbath with that, with giving them servants rest and outsiders refreshment, and leaving food for fallow for people to glean, the poor to glean.
Cool. And that again is a society thing.
Yeah.
Your neighbor next to you. It's if the whole society does this, then the poor are taken care of and the strangers are taken care of. That is so cool. I really like that.
Right. And I wonder too, if we are doing these things where we are treating the poor with kindness in this, will we want to spread a false report? about them.
Absolutely. I'm writing, I'm sorry.
Sal, there's something going on here. We can hardly hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is
Okay.
that better now?
Yep, that's better.
Okay, I was leaning over a piece of paper writing, so the mic wasn't picking me up, sorry. All right, so I'm going to have to listen to this. I was hoping to take notes and kind of review the notes, but I guess I'm going to have to listen to the recording.
Go ahead, Gary.
Is it possible that if we move, let's say, our worship day or day of rest to a different day other than the Sabbath, that we are bearing a false witness of our relationship with God and making it something different that's more man-made than God-made?
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. Thank you so much for bringing that up. That's excellent.
Also,
Oh,
Gary,
sorry.
Gary, can you say that again? That was priceless. Please say that again if you can.
I wonder if we move the Sabbath day or day of true worship to a different day, which we've done, or well, not we, but many have done, are we not in fact bearing a false witness about who we serve? That God, whom is the God who requires or has stated the Sabbath day is a day of rest, we've moved that day to a different day, and it has become something different than what our marriage with Jehovah really is. We've changed it and made it a man-made day rather than a God set-apart day of rest, as a Sabbath day is.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think that that points to one of the things, the reason I'm presenting this is because he's been building this in me for years, probably 10 years or so. So I've had a lot more time than just, the 15 minutes or so that you guys have been thinking about it. One of the things that I think is the common denominator between these two is fear of man. Why would we go with a multitude to bear a false witness, whether it's Facebook or wherever it is? Why would we go with them? Because of fear of man. And why would we change his Sabbath that he set apart from the beginning of time? Why would we change that? Because somehow we think that man's reasoning is more important or valuable than his reasoning. That goes back to the fear of man again. I think that one of the I think there are many. The more I study it, the more links that I see between them. But I think one of the key links between these two is fear of man.
Sally, if I may, you're just blowing me away here. Like, wow. When I first started keeping the Sabbath, I was so afraid somebody would find out.
Yeah.
So afraid. I used to hide. I'd see these people, Seventh-day Adventist or Baptist, going to church. They have their Bible out walking down the street, and I could never let anyone see my Bible. That's why I always took a briefcase. And I used to hide when I first started keeping the Sabbath, so nobody would know. Like, wow, you're killing me here.
And if that is true, then if we are bearing a false witness by celebrating a Sabbath that is man-made, how can we expect to have a true witness when we speak to our society about things like abortion and false imprisonment and all the things that are so about greed in corporations? How can we possibly expect to have them believe our witness about what's happening around us when they can't believe our witness with the Sabbath? I think that may also be entering into why we haven't been the salt that he calls us to be.
Collier, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's blown me away. I didn't like telling much people, I was doing the Sabbath, but I was learning. And to understand that God put the Sabbath in there to be a witness like a wedding ring, that just blew me away. Because in marriage, if you don't honor your wife with putting the ring on and cherish the words you say, the same thing, you're being a false witness about your own marriage as you are with Jehovah's marriage. And wow, that's awesome.
It's one of the reasons I don't like to call the 10 Commandments the 10 Commandments. I like the Decalogue or the 10, because to me, calling them the 10 Commandments just is a false witness. This is not what these are about. These are about his love for us. Anyway.
Now, going back to what Gary was saying, it brings to mind that all of the ones that you've shown, 2 and 3 and 14 and 7, it breaks all of those commandments. Just what he was saying by changing the day of worship, accepting a false deity.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
And we can't just say we're Sabbath keepers and not be Sabbath keepers.
Yeah.
May I just say one more thing?
Sure.
I don't see I'm not seeing the spreadsheet right now, but when we are going to a different day, there's also idolatry. There's also we are in fact committing adultery because we've changed and have, like you see in the number 3, we've changed and started worshiping a different God in reality, and consequently in a covenant we are committing adultery when we do that. And I'm really grateful to see this in this way, because I had not seen it in this way before, but now that I do, it becomes so obvious what Father or Jehovah is saying to us. It's so clear, and thank you.
He's amazing. He is amazing.
A little comment here.
Yes.
I see the connection of the 2 sections so well. Thank you so much. And by contrast, also somebody is keeping the Sabbath and the festivals, for example, but doesn't treat the neighbor godly. Is what Jehovah says at some point: I am sick of your festivals and of your sacrifices.
Yes.
So this is another scenario, by contrast, saying by mouth and initially keeping and boasting we keep the Sabbath,
yes,
the 7th day, but then the rest of the week we are not honest in business.
Yes,
we are greedy. The same, it's a terrible testimony, and we draw people away from Jehovah. So I do see how the 2 sections support each other and cannot do one without the other. It's about the circumcision of the heart, also in Deuteronomy 20. That has to the talk has to be supported by the walk, right?
Yes.
So yes, I can see the support between the 2 sections. Wonderful. Thank you, Sal.
Cool. Sure. Are we ready to go to the next section?
Have we got just another more comment there, please, Sal?
Okay, sure.
In the no other gods, can you go back to that screen?
Just a minute. I think it might be forward. All right, this one?
Yes, please. Gary mentioned that no other gods, you commit adultery when you do it on another day.
Yes.
But when you go down to take the name of Jehovah in vain, you're stealing from Jehovah by
Yes.
doing it on another day. And I'm going, wow, I just opens up a can of worms that we play with and not realize the consequences of.
Yeah. Yes.
Can I just interrupt? Can you hear me now? I've been talking away here. Nobody could hear me. I was muted.
No.
If when you finish speaking, please turn your mics off so that we don't get the background noise from some of you. Otherwise, we'll have to mute everybody while somebody's talking. So if you could do that, please remember to do that each individually. Thank you. Carry on, Sal. It's yours.
Okay, so are we done with row 4, the remember the Sabbath and not bear false witness, and ready to go to row 2, no other gods and not commit adultery? Okay, I'm not hearing objections. I'm going to assume that means yes, we're ready. So he starts out the next section, which is, okay, Randy, who is reading Exodus 22, 16 to 31?
Ginny Johnson.
Okay.
What are the verses, Sal? 16?
Exodus 22, oh, just a minute. Let me go back up, sorry. Exodus 22, 16 to 31. Yeah.
Okay, 16. If her father refuses to give her to him, he shall weigh out silver according to the marriage contract of the virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Anyone who lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. One who brings offerings to the gods shall be destroyed, only to Hashem alone. You shall not taunt or oppress a stranger, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not cause pain to any widow or orphan. If you dare to cause him pain, for if he shall cry out to me, I shall surely hear his outcry. My wrath shall blaze, and I shall kill you by the sword, and your wives will be widows, and your children orphans. When you lend money to my people, to the poor person who is with you, do not act toward him as a creditor. Do not lay interest upon him. If you take your fellow's garment as security, until sunset shall you return it to him. For it alone is his clothing. It is his garment for his skin. In what should he lie down? So it will be that if he cries out to me, I shall listen, for I am compassionate. You shall not revile God, and you shall not curse a leader among your people. Do not delay your fullness offering or your priestly heave offering. The firstborn of your sons shall you present to me. So shall you do to your ox, to your flock. For a 7-day period shall it be with its mother. On the 8th day you may present it to me. People of holiness shall you be to me. You shall not eat flesh of an animal that was torn in the field. To the dog shall you throw it.
So what is the main point? How does this relate to do not commit adultery and no other gods? So
faithfulness to the covenant.
It does have to do with the covenant. It's interesting to me is that almost nothing that we would associate with committing adultery is mentioned in here. And yet, at least for me, the reason I know that this section is talking about this row is because it starts and ends with what we would commonly call adultery, something that's recognizable. So, or it starts and ends with something that we would recognize as no other gods. So it seems pretty, that the rest of it, it seems to me that the rest of it is definitely talking about adultery, even though there are very few references to something that we would call committing adultery.
I see the part about the sorcery and adultery. I understand that part. I'm not seeing it for the end, though. Can you be more specific and help me to see it?
Okay, at the very end on the 31, actually, where does it start? On 29, it starts, thou shalt not delay to offer the first of thy ripe fruits and the firstborn of the sons, and thou shalt be holy. So it's ending with a reference to no other gods, and it begins fairly quickly at the beginning with a reference to the sorcery.
I gotta ask you, how is not offering your first fruits committing adultery? I think I see it, but I want you to explain. I want you to expand on this.
Can we discuss that, or do you want me to say it? Is that for discussion?
You're leading the show here. I'm just asking a question. This is intriguing. I'm fascinated. So I'm not trying to throw doubt at you. I'm just wow, and I'm trying to get as much out of this before you go someplace else.
One of the key things, like I said, this has been something that he's been putting into me for about 10 years. And
okay, so how is not making an offering adultery?
Right. So one of the things that I'm trying to explain, I do what you do. I take the long way around sometimes.
Well, that's good. So, carry on.
Okay, so one of the things that he had me study in regards to this is the no other gods thing. He often calls no other gods, he often calls the idols the work of men's hands. And what I have, this is one that he particularly called me on, because I had a tendency, I don't think I do anymore, but you know, our hearts are deceitful, who knows? But I had a tendency that even I recognized to define myself by what I did. And that the position I held and the work that I did gave me value. And so it was the work of the hands, the work of my hands that I did that was more valuable to me sometimes than his word. So if we talk about that, and sometimes it's not just the work of our hands, it can be who we're with or what we have, or you know, or our status. But for me, it was often the work of my hands. So if I value the work of my hands, which in our society is also can be our wealth and what we own, then I am less likely to offer the first of my fruits, ripe fruits, which is, you know, as a gardener, that's the work of my hands. I have to work and weed and plant and water and do all that sort of stuff. I'm likely to forget that because I'm valuing the work of my hands more than I value the work of his hands, which is other people. And so that to me was the tie-in. And the being holy unto him, where our hearts are completely and totally given to him, and we don't have anything standing between us. We don't have anything else giving us value, giving us identity, protecting us, providing for us. And for me, again, it was the work of my hands. He has blessed me. I can't think of a job or a position that I've had that I haven't loved. But that's a mixed blessing because it means I love doing this stuff. So it's really easy to make it more important than he is.
Okay,
so to me, how that ties in.
Yeah, okay. Stuart says not offering first fruits is like refusing to have sex with your spouse. It's an adultery in that it refuses to engage in intimacy. Yolanda said giving precedency to any other is adultery. And Marissa says, when we withhold our offerings or give God second best, we are making ourselves a God before him, and so commit adultery. Yeah. Just getting back to what you said, okay, being devil's advocate here, like I used to work 80 hours a week doing pipelines, and I know that the pipelines was my God at the time, but working really hard during the week and making that money during the week and focusing on doing your job, I don't see that as committing adultery. We're commanded to work 6 days a week. So like, I see what you're saying, but I'm trying to get you to draw this out more is what I'm trying to do. So how are you connecting, not giving like if I work 6 days a week and I make $1 gazillion and I give 1/10 of that, okay, I've given my first fruits, or if I withhold that, I'm committing adultery. That's what I'm trying to get. How is my withholding it committing adultery here? Is it because I'm loving my money more than I'm loving Jehovah? Is that it?
Yeah. For me, it is more working too much isn't the issue. Working 80 hours a week or 100 hours a week or whatever you work isn't the issue if that's what he has for you to do. But sometimes when that becomes something that stands between you and him, and when you look to your work first and you say, oh, I worked so hard for this that I just, don't want to give it because I earned this. To me, it's the attitude that this is not the work that he has given me to do and he has blessed me to do, that this is now the work of my hands. And we take ownership of it in a way that does not acknowledge that it is his gift to us. Work is his gift to us. He gave it to Adam. That was one of the first things that he gave. But we can take anything and make it a God. We can take a car and make it a God, for heaven's sakes.
Okay, Alcatel says, when you don't give it to Yah, then you are using it in another thing. Then you are using it in another thing is not him. Okay, Randall says, even though I left the SDA, I cannot throw them entirely under the bus because without them, I would not have learned about the Shabbat, which led me to where I am today. Okay.
Wouldn't that put us in the category of not doing things in the manner in which Jehovah has prescribed for us to do? And also puts us on the same playing field that Cain was on?
Yes.
He brought an offering to God, but it wasn't the best.
Yeah.
Or the first.
So was Cain committing adultery?
Sounds like it.
Well, I think when we put something else as our God, that other than Jehovah, that's what the spiritual adultery is. And if we choose not to obey him, then it's usually because we think we have a better idea, and then we're making our own selves our God.
Right.
Can I add a little bit?
Can we use your hand button here so Randy and I know who's wanting to talk, if we could, please. I think, Simon, you were going to say something?
Sure. I was just going to say, Jehovah has told us how to love him, and we can't love him the way we want to love him. And so when we what this looks like to me is, these are all things that have to do with loving him however we choose to love him instead of how he's commanded us to love him. When we do that, it's a lack of love. And a lack of love is, by definition, adultery to our spouse. And so I think that's what this is speaking to, is all of this is, and I know this ties into what most people have said, but this is a lesson that resonates with me. My wife and I had a conversation about this when I first got married to her, because I had an idea of how I was going to love her, and it wasn't her idea of how I was going to love her. So my point here is just that we can't love somebody else the way we want to love somebody. We've got to love somebody the way they want to be loved. And the way our Father wants to be loved is perfectly. And this is how he perfectly wants to be loved by his bride. And so that's just my 2 cents on this.
Okay, Sal, do you want to comment on that, or you want me to go to Rebecca now?
Go ahead to Rebecca.
Okay, Rebecca, go ahead.
Yes, Yeshua said you cannot serve Jehovah and Mammona at the same time. There's no middle way in there. And it seems that to try to serve Jehovah in other ways than his ways, it's spiritual idolatry or adultery. And those ways can be many, many ways, very subtle, some of not worshiping or serving Jehovah the way he wants us to. So I see in this very text the connection between the witchcraft and between the pagan practices being idolatry or spiritual adultery in Jehovah's eyes. He talks immensely about don't worship me the way the pagan tribes around you do it. It's an abomination. And we know that pagan tribes would slaughter animals and eat the flesh and drink the blood on the spot to gain the power of that animal. And that's an abomination, it's an idolatry, it's spiritual adultery. That's why it's at the end of this passage. And also in the middle of the passage, it says, do not allow a practicer of witchcraft to live, because it's witchcraft. So it comes to anything that is not Jehovah's way. Seems to be unloyalty from us to him. It's not his ways, even if it's very close and sounds good. If it's not his ways. That's why in the middle of the other text, it says don't bathe the kid in his mother's milk. It's a pagan practice. So all of that is abomination, is not being loyal to the covenant, to the way he wants us to love each other. So I do see a lot of connection in the text of faithfulness with all the details that are spread in the text, with all those pagan practices around. And in the nowadays, it has different forms, as everybody mentioned. I support everything that everybody else mentioned. Even I was thinking of the incident with Cain and Abel. It was not the first fruits. The two boys knew what's an acceptable sacrifice or not. That's why the difference is there. So Cain wanted his way, not Jehovah's way, because Abel brought the first fruits of the flocks, but Cain didn't bring the first fruits of the harvest. It was perfect, acceptable sacrifice, but it was not the first fruits, it was the second fruits or the leftover, which is not acceptable to Jehovah. So that's my addition.
Okay, Sal, I got no more hands up here, and
Okay.
Susan? Susan's hand's up.
okay.
Sorry, I had to find my mic. I think I have heard it said many, many, many times before since I have come into covenant with Jehovah, especially on sighted moon. If we are to celebrate the feast, yes, that's in the right direction. But if we do it on the wrong day, where does that leave us? And that's exactly what's happening here. Do it the way he wants. And you know, you wouldn't, like has been said, you wouldn't celebrate your wife's birthday when it's not her birthday. And you wouldn't celebrate Passover when it's not Passover. So we really have to follow everything he says to the letter.
Is there anyone else? Going back to what I was telling Joe about, he really dealt with me hard on this one because I loved my work, and sometimes I loved my work more than I loved him. And what really confused me at first about this was that he was talking about how we treated the poor and the strangers, and he's talking very little about what we would commonly call adultery. And as I thought about it, when is it that people in general mistreat the poor or the strangers? And in this case, the strangers were people who had left their families, because this is a society that supports families well. And your families, you know, your family has a plot and you inherit the plot and you stay together. And so there's an enormous amount of family support. So a stranger coming away from their family from a different nation and coming in doesn't have that family support, which makes them more vulnerable. So why is it that he's talking mostly, a good chunk of the time, about not commit adultery? He's talking about the poor and the stranger and the widow and the orphan, those who are most vulnerable in society. When is it that we mistreat them? The majority of the time when they're mistreated, because they're the work of his hands, the majority of the time it's when the work of our hands is more important to us than the work of Jehovah's hands, which are the people around us. And to me, what he was saying is that when the work of our hands is more important than the work of his hands, then we tend to treat people as tools, as an object, as a way to get what we want or where we're trying to go. We forget that they are made in his image and he is a father to them. And he specifically says, if they cry out to me, sweetheart, you're getting it. I protect them. So when it is absolutely critical that we know that the work of his hands is more important than the work of our hands. And it's not just people who are in secular jobs who tend to do this. Ministries can do this too, where I was just reading about a ministry where they felt that this was happening in their leadership, that it was more about getting more meetings and getting more whatever, and that the ministry had become the work of their hands instead of a work that our Father was doing through them. The other thing that I noticed through here that I feel like he was teaching me is all of the things on the column that says love Jehovah are really nebulous. And that we can say, oh yeah, I love him with my whole heart and I have no other gods. And our hearts can deceive ourselves and we can be Pharisees very easily, which is one of the reasons I like to have those little thermometers so that I know, oh yeah, I'm slipping up here, got to pay attention. This to me is kind of like he's saying, the whole point of this is that I want you to love me with everything that you have. But I know that your heart is deceitful. So I'm also going to tell you to love my handiwork, because as you relate with those who are made in my image, it will become obvious if you're having a problem in our relationship. So if I'm not treating the poor and the stranger and the widow and the orphan as people and giving them the respect that they deserve as ones who are created in his image, then to me, it's telling me that I have another God and I better get to the bottom of this. So these, the ones on the right, to me, are the thermometers that tell us, yeah, you may think everything's okay here on the left side, but you've got a problem.
Okay, we have from Randy in the comments, to me, it's like not giving up things that pleasure us in the physical world to rest and be with the Creator on Shabbat is a form of adultery.
Yeah.
Aiza, I believe she's from the Philippines, business leads to commit spiritual adultery because of business. We are making our own way of living without recognizing God and hear God's voice. Okay, and Becca has her hand up. Go ahead, Becca.
Yes, to support everything that was just said, I'm gonna read the 2 verses in Ezekiel that Jehovah says about Sodom and Gomorrah, because the general idea is that they were punished because of their sexual promiscuity, but it started with neglecting the poor, the widow, the orphan. And he
You got
says
a
like
chapter
this.
and verse? Chapter and verse, Rebecca. What chapter
Yes,
and verse?
Ezekiel 16, verses 49 and 50. See, this was the crookedness of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had pride, sufficiency of bread, and unconcerned ease, and she did not help the poor and needy. And they were haughty and did abomination before me, and I took them away when I saw it. So when we start neglecting this commandment of Jehovah to look after the poor, widows, and orphans, we go a slippery slope down the road, and we end up doing abomination like Sodom and Gomorrah did.
Let me just add to that, that we've,
much for bringing that out.
sorry, Sal, I spoke over top of you.
That's okay, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I said, thank you so much for bringing that out. That is so directly connected to that. And you're right, most people don't understand that, why they were destroyed. And it is because of this. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I was just going to say that we've just finished a 3rd year tithe year. And just, we had it on each of our newsletters what that year was. Just reminding everybody, there's a prayer which I forgot to remind you about, that once you've completed that year, you're to ask for a blessing. Again, it covers the widows and orphans. And there's another verse that jumps to mind that says that if you don't do this, he's going to make you, your wife, a widow, so that your family can experience what it's like to be a widow and an orphan. Great stuff. Great stuff.
Are we ready to go to the next row?
Fiona saying, if we look after the poor, we are full of love, no room for the wicked flesh to be fed.
Can I talk?
Go ahead,
Sure.
whoever
Hello.
that is.
It's Sarah Modrell. Is this not what we are going to be judged by in the end when we stand before God?
By our covenant? By how we keep the covenant?
Yes.
I think it will be part of it. Joe, do you have, but I tend, he is law and he is justice. And one of the things that he has impressed upon me is that we as humans tend to think of the prosecutor and the defender as two different things. But I think from his point of view, it's the same. You cannot have his love without his justice. You can't have his justice without his love. So when I tend to describe that judgment, I tend to describe it more in terms of how did we love him, or how did we love the people that he made in his image, as opposed to, how did we keep the commandments? But they are so interrelated that I think it's hard to distinguish between the two. Joe, do you have something more specific on that?
Well,
Is
I
that
would,
not why? Is
Go
that
ahead.
not why Yeshua came? God
Yes.
came here to show us how to love it.
God what? Oh, I'm sorry.
To show us how to love and to also pay for not loving.
Did he?
yeah. Let me jump in here before we get too far down the road, and I forgot what I was going to say. By keeping the commandments, the ones that we're talking about here, the ones that Sal's just blowing me away with, by keeping them, we are showing Jehovah that we love him.
Mm-hmm.
You can go around saying, I love Jesus, I love Jesus, I love Jesus, I love Jesus. But if you're not keeping the commandments, you're not loving him. And that's why the 5 foolish virgins, they don't know, because they're not keeping the commandments. So by loving him, we keep the commandments. So the question that Sarah was asking, how are we going to be judged at the end? Well, you're going to be judged on your love. You will know them by their love for one another. What is that love? Is it Corinthians? It says, unless you have love, you're a clanging bell. That's not being nice to each other. That's not being all peaches and cream and lovey-dovey. That's by keeping the commandments with each other, treating each other fairly, which, like I always thought the 10 Commandments was Exodus 20. Boom, 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 black and white, there it is. But Sal, she's just slaying me here by expanding them out and showing me how they're meshed together. That's love. That's love. That's love for our brethren. That's love for each other. That's what we're going to be judged on. Yes, it's the commandments, but it's more than the black and white simple stuff that I thought it was. It's bigger than that. And Sal's doing a great job of doing it. So that's what I believe we're going to be judged on. And I don't want to change the debate into that now. I'd like to keep it focused on what Sal's doing here and go on to the next one if we're done. This is great. I'm thrilled here.
Okay, I thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks. And since you brought up 1 Corinthians 13, it is interesting that just a few weeks ago, he showed me that that you can't, it's really hard to say what is good, because people like to act good in order to manipulate you. It's much easier to say what not to do, because if you're killing somebody, that's not love. I mean, that's just flat out. If you're committing adultery, that's not love. So when you're talking to a child, you usually have to, don't hit them, don't take their toys. It's all about what not to do, because trying to describe what is love can be manipulated into, if the heart intent is to manipulate, what looks like love may not be love. It may be very vicious, actually, in the long run. But what he showed me is that if we get time, we'll get to what is the emotional impact of each one of these, and what is a characteristic that would describe the positive of each one of these. And it's 1 Corinthians 13, patience and kindness and all of those sorts of things. So 1 Corinthians 13 is another way to say the 10 Commandments. from
Okay.
a positive point of view. Anyway,
Okay, Becca's got her hand up, and I'm just before I give her the floor here. I don't want to run out of time here today. I'd like Sal to keep on going and get going here. So if we can hold off on her questions a little bit, because otherwise we're going to run out of time. And this is a great subject. I don't want to not finish it. Okay, so go ahead, Rebecca.
So a little thought to support that we are to look after the poor is everything can be taken from us. And nowadays we can see that the government can take everything from us, even the property we own, our rights, our liberty. There's one thing will never be taken away from us. That's what we have done for others. And that will follow us in the next dimension of love. That's why Yeshua says, store treasures in heaven, not on earth, because on earth, everything can be taken from us at some point. And as far as the Jehovah's judgment, I can know for sure he will be fair in his judgment. He will not be unfair. That's not his character. He'll be fair with all the opportunities that he's been given to everyone. So he will be fair. Even a glass of water given to a thirsty person will be counted and will be gathered in heaven. So no doubt about that. Okay, that's all.
Okay. You got
Randy.
Go ahead, Sal.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Do we have somebody to read Exodus 21, 1 through 11 and Exodus 21, 12 through 36?
Simon, you are up to read. Can you say those scriptures again, please?
Okay. Exodus 21, 1 through 11. Can you see my screen, or did I lose you while I was going back and forth?
No, I can see the screen. I can see the screen. Thank you.
Exodus 21, 1 through 11 and Exodus 21, 12 through 36.
Okay.
So it's, I think, pretty much all of Exodus 21.
Do you want to stop at 11?
Yes, I do. This one, yes, I do.
Okay. These are the right rulings which you are to set before them. When you buy a Hebrew servant, he serves 6 years, and in the 7th year he goes out free for naught. If he comes by himself, he goes out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children are her master's, and he goes out by himself. If the servant truly says, I love my master, my wife, my children, let me not go out free, then his master shall bring him before Elohim, and shall bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. And when a man sells his daughter to be a female servant, she does not go out as the male servants do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who has engaged her to himself, then he shall let her be ransomed. He shall have no authority to sell her to a foreign people because of him deceiving her. And if he has engaged her to his son, he is to do to her as the right of daughters. If he takes another wife, her food, her covering, and her marriage rights are not to be diminished. And if he does not do these 3 for her, then she shall go out for naught without silver.
What does this have to do with I am Jehovah thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage?
Surely the God of all the earth shall do righteously.
Absolutely. What else?
I mean, this sounds like the way that that he intends to treat us. We're by no means a man, but a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so I suggest he's probably laying this out for us to show us that he's not going to let us go. He's going to, whatever kind of servant we are, will be his.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, it looks to me like this is how he treats a servant.
I think that's excellent. Yeah, because yes, He brought us out of Egypt, but now we are his. I agree with that. It's also interesting that at a point, verse 5, that even a servant has a choice. And he says, I'm not going to go out free. Yes, on the seventh year, you may go out free, but you don't have to. So there is a respect here that is significant. They are not being used as machinery to get a job done, but they're people.
Amen.
Go ahead. What else do we see in here? Is there anything else?
I see something.
Okay.
From verse 7 on, and if a man shall sell his daughter, at first it sounds quite cruel, but actually it's the way that Jehovah balances the social status. It's not like today by taxation. It was by mingling in within the community of Jehovah that some don't go too rich compared to others stay poor.
Yes.
So when this daughter was sold, it was from a less fortunate family into richer family, and then both families, being very community oriented, would help each other.
Yes.
So that's what I see there.
I am so glad you brought that up. I don't want to continue with that yet, but I am so glad you brought that up. I absolutely agree. Thank you. Anything else?
Go ahead, Hugo.
Well, Jehovah has tied himself to his word. I mean, he made a promise. And it's a bit like the servant does there. He does not want to go free, so he makes a promise.
Yes.
Just that.
Okay. Anything else from anybody else have some things they want to share? Okay, let's go to the next section then. Exodus 21, 12 through 36. Who will be reading that?
Can I just interrupt first? I was waiting for someone else to come in there. I'm still trying to make that connection here. Like all I see is coming out of bondage in Egypt in Exodus 21, verse 2, and having your servant not be a servant like you were in Egypt. Am I blind? Am I missing something? Like that's all I'm really seeing.
What's the general gist of it?
Well, that you just don't treat your servants like you were treated in Egypt.
I think that's part of it, that you treat them as people, that even if they're a servant, you don't treat them as a slave, as a tool, as a machinery to get your job done. They still have the option. Number one, they're only going to be there for 6 years, and they will go out free for nothing unless they choose to stay with you.
So when they choose to stay with you, is that like agreeing to the marriage vows? Is that the connection here?
I think there's more to it, but I don't want to go into that yet until we go to the second part.
Okay. Okay, I'm just trying.
Yeah, I know it's like I said, I've been doing this for a while, so it's made more sense to me, but it certainly didn't the first time I saw it. Okay.
Hang on, let me read a couple comments here before you move on.
Okay.
Marissa says, we are now God's servants, slaves,
yes,
as it says in Romans 6.
Yes.
He has purchased us, and so we need to treat the work of his hands in the way he commands us to. He is showing us his standards for treating servants unlike the Egyptians did.
Yes.
Okay, and Barry Fiona, a slave could run away without penalty when abused. Pharaoh didn't comply with God's instructions. Dex says, everyone has always taught that the Sodomites are the homosexuals. What if everyone has gotten that wrong because of the modern definition of words? What if he is talking about the residents of Sodom and their sins are not taking care of the widows and orphans?
Oh, my.
Buzzy says, if you brought a slave, could you free him that day if you wanted?
And that is going to be, I'm going to bring that up in a little bit, but that is, to me, the connection between these two is part of the connection between verse 2 and verse 13 and chapter 20.
Okay, one more comment. Maybe this portion means slavery to Jehovah. This is from Jess. Slavery to Jehovah provides more freedom than we could find on our own. You become a member of his household and receive his protection and share in all his provision.
Oh, I think that is so good. That is so good.
Okay, I got no more comments, no more hands up.
Okay, Hugo, did you have something?
Paul has his hand up.
Okay.
Yes, Sal, the other thing that I saw was he could let the slave go, but the slave chose because he loved his master and he loved his family.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry, I can't find my hand button. Doesn't it lends itself more to the servant being bought?
Uh-huh.
And after a certain amount of time, surely he will have fulfilled the price that was on his head, so to speak.
Right.
And would be set free. It's like you buy somebody, you wouldn't keep them forever.
If they were a slave, you would, but if it's a Hebrew, you wouldn't. That's correct.
But do we not sometimes use the word slave when it should be servant?
And in our culture, those two have become so mixed. And so many times in his word, I have found when they're talking about servants and sometimes even slaves, that what is a more accurate description in our culture would be employee. You know, that they're taking orders for somebody else and they're getting their money in there, which provides their food and clothing from somebody else. But that's a whole nother topic. But yes, you're correct. I think that there is a difference between slave and servant, and but it's a fine one. It's a fine difference. Certainly here, I don't think it matters whether a slave or a servant. He is telling us here, to me, that we're to treat them as his handiwork, who are made in his image. They still have dignity, and we're not supposed to, and we're supposed to respect that.
Right. Because we're not that far removed from the time when people were sold because they couldn't pay their debts.
Yeah. Well, and I've heard instances of people going to jail, which is almost worse in some ways, depending on what's happening.
Yes.
Anything else?
Susie, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do. In some ways, this kind of speaks to me of God's people, because we were all slaves before he released us. And we are given the option to follow him or to go out on our own and be free in the world. And a lot of us, well, us here, us people, we choose to follow him. So basically, have we been put on the door and the all through our ears?
I got my ears pierced years ago, specifically.
Yeah, I just kind of thought that related to me, because I always felt like a slave before.
Yeah.
And I feel so much freer, even though I follow that Decalogue. And I just feel like I'm protected all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up here, Sal.
Okay, so who is reading Exodus 21, 12 through 36?
Simon, could you go ahead and finish that for us, buddy? I see your hand up as well, so we'll get to your comment.
We'll do it later. Yeah, it's fine. I don't want to hold everybody up. That's cool.
Thank you, brother.
He who strikes a man so that he dies shall certainly be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait, but Elohim delivered him into his hand, then I shall appoint for you a place where he is to flee. For when a man acts presumptuously against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you are to take him, even from my slaughtered place, to die. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall certainly be put to death. And he who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall certainly be put to death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall certainly be put to death. And when men strive together, and one strikes another with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be innocent. He only pays for lost time and sees to it that he is completely healed. And when a man strikes his male or female servant with a rod, so that he dies under his hand, he shall certainly be punished. But if he remains alive a day or two, he is not punished, for he is his property. And when men strive, they shall and when men strive, and they shall smite a pregnant woman, and her child comes out, yet there is no injury, he shall certainly be punished according as the woman's husband lays upon him, and he shall give through the judges. But if there is an injury, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, lash for lash. And when a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he is to let him go free for the sake of the eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he is to let him go free for the sake of the tooth. And when an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall certainly be stoned, and its flesh is not eaten, and the owner of the ox is innocent. However, if the ox was previously in the habit of goring, its owner has been warned, and he has not kept it confined so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox is stoned, and its owner also put to death. If a sin covering is laid upon him, then he shall give the ransom of his life, whatever is laid on him. When it has gored a son or gored a daughter, whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter according to this right ruling, it is done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he is to give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox is stoned. When a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit is to repay. He is to give silver to their owner, and the dead beast is his. And when the ox of a man smites the ox of his neighbor, and it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the silver from it, and also divide the dead ox. Or, if it was known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall certainly repay ox for ox, while the dead beast is his.
So what does that tell us about you shall not kill?
Well, it's talking about compensation.
Talking a lot about compensation.
But I'm not saying you shall not kill. You got me. You got to help me here.
It certainly. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, please go.
It certainly seems that it's extending far beyond the actual act of killing, which is certainly in accordance with what Messiah says about calling another man a fool, or saying to him Raka, but this is even more explicit. It goes into whether you should have known that something would kill another person and didn't do anything to help them, or restrain that which could have killed them. Or there seems to be a great deal more liability and responsibility here than one would read into thou shalt not. It's not, we're pretty sure that we shouldn't be bludgeoning people in the parking lot, but this is far more than that.
So this is
So
okay.
why is it far more?
What Simon's saying there, just following up on that, this is like mad. If you get behind the wheel and you're drinking and you kill somebody, you're guilty of murder.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So if you like, I work in construction, if you leave a hole open, somebody falls in it and they get hurt, I'm guilty of hurting them. Or if they die, I'm guilty of killing them.
Yes.
Okay. I may be a little bit slow, but I get it. Very good.
That's okay.
And Finn says, thank you, Sal, for your digging. Sure makes us see some more God angles, many dimensions. You must have big biceps. Compensation is about the importance of preserving life. So it is the extension of not allowing any life to be stolen. I like the way she worded to use stolen. I like that. Anyone else got their hands up? I don't see any. Brandy?
Paul has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. So the object here is to let somebody know that in the daily run of all of his work, is not to literally think of he's got to be careful of his property, that it doesn't affect damage on anybody else.
Yes.
And also his mental attitude. If he knows that animal will do that, he has to make sure it is fenced in so it will not cause injury.
Yes.
This thought is, as comes around, if you don't take care, you are killing your neighbor, whether they've been killed or not. It's the thought that if you don't protect people from the dangerous animal, or even from your own thoughts about how you perceive other people, you are killing them. You must come back to if I love other people, I must tie the animal up. I must restrain it.
Yes.
I must protect those around my property from this animal.
Yes.
Therefore, I must show love in doing that. Otherwise,
Yes.
I'm doing the opposite. I am killing anybody that comes onto my property that animal may eventually injure.
Yes.
Ronnie Wells, got your hand up?
Yes. Verse 18, it starts talking about the anger issues and emotions, how we should keep our emotions in check so that we do not become so angry that we lash out at someone or to hurt them, or that we see an animal in need and we just pass it by because we're so angry.
Yes.
So it does bring up we shouldn't kill.
Yeah.
Because God certainly has not unleashed his anger upon us.
Excellent. Thank you.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Exactly. Yes, Yeshua raises the bar on this, saying that if we hate somebody, we murder that person. As Paul and Ronnie said, hatred, if we allow that into our heart, into our mind, we kill that person. We follow with maybe gossiping or talking bad about the person, and we kill that person's reputation, or we kill that person's self-esteem when we call people names because of our anger or anything. So I see that very much, how we can kill others because of our hatred or negative thoughts or going around and talk bad.
Yes. Yes.
You go ahead, buddy.
again, I'm brought back to thinking before acting.
Yeah.
Shabbat is the time for that. And when we're cautious, we think about these things. We're never too cautious. That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else?
Up in the comments, Jess is saying this also speaks to the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, putting
Yes.
others' interests ahead of your own. Like Paul said, killing your brother equates to not loving them.
Yeah.
Barry says to restrain that tongue, it is full of bull.
Yep.
And Asa, gossip is also like killing. So absolutely.
Eugene has his hand up.
I feel that this is man-made in God's image.
Yes.
And you have to respect and honor your God.
Yes.
Mankind, as you see a neighbor, you have to love.
Yes.
Like you love God.
Yes.
Therefore, any violence done on purpose is done against God.
Yes.
That's all I have to say.
Very good.
Anybody else? Okay, one of the things that I noticed that was common is the corrective action. Is if it wasn't on purpose and it was by accident and the man died, there was a place that was set apart so that the manslayer could flee to. If someone kills somebody by accident, what do we call that today?
Manslaughter.
Manslaughter. And what would happen to them today? They'd probably go to prison. But here, Jehovah made a system so that the person committing manslaughter would flee to a city of refuge, which happened to be a city of Levites who spent their lives studying Torah, and they stayed in that city until the death of the high priest. Why would that be a corrective action?
It seems like a foreshadowing of what our high priest would do for us. It also protects the slayer of blood, the closest blood relative to the person murdered, or killed, from hunting down the other person who killed that person and actually committing premeditated murder, which was legal. I mean, it was acceptable, but you would still be killing somebody who was made in God's image.
Right. And that's a whole different topic that I don't want to go into, but
So sorry.
No. It certainly does apply, but I don't want to go down that rabbit trail right now because we're trying to wrap things up. One of the things that I saw is in the do not kill, it's specifically there's only two places where he said that we could go someplace else for a period of time. In the other rows that we've talked about, there is no corrective action mentioned. But in these two, the corrective action for manslaughter is you go live with the priests. The corrective action for somebody, just a minute, let me see if I'm pretty sure I did. There we go. The corrective action for somebody who's burdened with debt in a culture that has no need for large debts. They don't have, $500,000 houses. They don't have to expend a lot for businesses because you're inheriting businesses. Your education is mostly family education, healthcare, they've got a good society. So large debt isn't built into the expectation of their society. So why would this brother be so burdened with debt that he had to sell himself or a member of his family? And this debt, remember, this is Jehovah who is providing for the children of Israel. Why would he need to have so much debt? My thought, go ahead, good. I'd prefer to have discussion.
In Isaiah 58, we're told that there are certain things that we need to do in order to live upon the heights of Jacob and be provided for. My expectation would be if a person in that society is in debt, it's because he hasn't been in covenant, and therefore things haven't gone well for him. The other piece of this is, of course, that it could just be foreshadowing of our own debt to our Jehovah, because we've broken his covenant and we do owe him our lives. He's the king who forgives a great debt, and we're the servant required to forgive just a little of our brother.
Absolutely. And I think on a society level, not taking the foreshadowing part, but if it's because he's not in covenant and so he's in debt because he's trying to take care of himself and he's not in covenant and allowing our Father to take care of him, Jehovah to take care of him, then that's a systemic problem. Or if he is in covenant and he has been provided for, but he has so little ability to manage that he is spending he is using what Jehovah has given him wrongly and incorrectly, and he hasn't been taught how to manage it well, either because his parents didn't know or the family around him didn't know, or because he was stubborn and he wouldn't listen. For whatever, either of those problems are systemic. And the solution is to go to a family and live with a family who has shown that they know how to manage the gifts that they have been given and have been blessed with, have been blessed by being in covenant and living with them for 6 years. And hopefully during that 6 years, they would be either deliberately mentored or they would absorb just by being around the family that, oh, well, they think about this differently than I think about this, or they do this differently than, because there are some things that are so ingrained in us that we don't notice them until we're with somebody who does it differently. So I'm thinking that part of the reason that he's saying that we need to, that an option is to sell yourself and be a bondservant for 6 years, is because there's a systemic issue that's going on that needs more than pay the debt. I have known people. I used to work for a bankruptcy attorney, and one guy was losing the house that his grandmother gave to him debt-free, and he couldn't figure out why he was taking home like, $3,500, and he couldn't figure out why he couldn't live that. He was making much more, but he had a bunch of automatic withdrawals. He couldn't figure out why he was living. Well, you ask him what his expenses are. He had 6 $500 leases on cars that were cool cars. Well, if you're only taking $3,500 home and you're taking $3,000 of that for leases, then you're going to lose the house that your grandmother gave you. There was a systemic problem that throwing money at wasn't going to help. So I believe that doing this is like a second chance almost at a childhood to get into where he lives so that he can understand and be better able in 6 years to leave and conduct his business in a way that is honoring as the bride of Jehovah. But if he sees that he can't conduct himself, and perhaps it's from love, but it may also be because he just doesn't get it, and these people manage their resources so much better that I would rather be under their care than try to live out on my own, then he can choose to stay. So that's what I think is happening with the bondservant. With the manslayer, I think a lot of what we've been talking about, it's not just that we need to manage our anger and our emotions. It's also that we need to respect the people around us in our daily lives so that we don't leave a glass in the middle of the floor for them to trip over in the middle of the night and break and have glass in their foot. You know, that we take care of the things that we have been given in a way that shows an appreciation to our Father for giving us the gift, but also love to the people around us so that we're not creating opportunities for them to be seriously hurt. Now, there are people that I know that have not been raised that way. And to have an attitude where you are continually, I mean, you don't even know you're doing it. It's so much a part of you that, oh, I need to put this away so that, you know, it doesn't happen. And especially with children, you tend to do that. But there are people who have never been raised that way. So if they go and live in a city of priests where his word is washing through them on a daily basis because they're studying his word, and they're the ones that people come to for righteous rulings, and they know how to take care of the things around them. They know how to make sure that the axe head is actually attached to the handle and it won't fly off when you're using it. And they take care of these little details of life that other people can overlook. That it's, again, being confronted on a daily basis with people who think differently and have a different way of living. And to me, the idea is this is more than, okay, you need a 30-minute lesson and everything will be all right. This is a systemic issue that you have not learned how to love in daily life and to consider people in daily life. And that's going to take an immersion into a culture that does do that. This is, to me, much more kind and much more hopeful than throwing them in prison. That, to me, is one of the major things that they have in common. It's not the only thing, that's one of the major things that they have in common. Anybody else?
I've got Marissa here in the comments that says what you just said. They are cleansed by the studying of the word in the city of refuge.
Yes. Yes.
I don't
Any
see
other comments? Okay. All right, we covered that. Before we review this, I was going to review this, but we're kind of running out of time. Round 2, that we certainly do not have time for, does talk, some of you guys brought it up,
Are we still on just round 1?
We're still on round 1. We did not get to round 2. Okay. That is not going to happen in the next 20 minutes. Sorry. So, all right, so let's review what do we see that connects verse 2 to verse 13? We didn't really tie that up.
I believe somebody already said that we're made in the image of God, and therefore, if we are to kill another human being, that's literally what ties those two together.
Yeah. I think that's I agree that is huge. Okay, so round 2 that we won't have time to get into, but that people mentioned was what his son said when he said, we're talking about anger here. When we say thou shalt not kill, and right here, when we say not thou shalt not kill, the root is anger, and it's personal. And that can grow to anger. Doesn't have to be said. You can just be angry and not express it. But then it can grow to be angry enough that you're saying something, you're saying raka, and raka essentially means you're empty-headed, you're senseless, you have no value to society. And so the person who says you have no value to society goes to the council, which is the group of judgment for that society, and they're in danger of the council. And the next step is you fool. You fool is even greater. It says that you despise salvation and you're godless and you're impious, and it's more of an eternal kind of condemnation, saying that even Jehovah is going to throw you away. So the depth changes. It goes from personal and private and quiet to verbal, that society, and then to the very worth. Why in the world would even Jehovah himself pay attention to such a worthless being? And then he goes back, thou shalt not kill, and he ties it back to giving our gifts to the altar and leaving the gifts to the before the altar. So he also ties killing and our relationship with Jehovah. And he goes in, and we know that he relates anger to killing. And what I would love to discuss at some point, but not today, is what is the root of anger? Why do we get angry? And what is the opposite of anger? And then going back through and asking, okay, if anger is the root of killing, what emotions are related to all the other things that we've talked about? And what is the root of those things? And what is the opposite of those things? And we haven't even talked about row 3 yet. How does row 3 fit into all of this? And how does it change what we have discussed? Or does it change what we have discussed? And why in the world does he take row 3 and discuss them separately? And they're not even in the same chapter. He discusses one at the beginning of chapter 2 and the other one at the end of chapter 23. Why would they be so radically removed from each other? And round 4 is, and some of you, thank you so very much, I'm so glad you brought them in, is what other verses in his word give insight to this? And thank you so much for bringing them up. And round 5 is, none of the book of the covenant talks about row 5. What does row 5 have to do with this? What does that mean to us? And what does everything that we've talked about mean to me personally? One of the things that we've touched on is it talks about, who am I? Where do I get my worth and my identity? Do I base who I am and how I present myself on my physical being, on my heritage, how I am made, how I identify myself? Do I present what gives me worth? Is it my work or my job or my ministry? Is it my relationships, who I'm with, or my family? Is it my possessions or my social status? And this isn't going forward anymore. So, and who should it be based on? And we've talked about this quite a bit. How do I treat others? Do I expect them to do what I want them to do? Is my will more important than their will or than His will? Do I use them as tools to accomplish the work of my hands? Do I take what He has given them, whether it's possessions or ideas or work that they have done, and claim them as my own? Do I quickly dismiss their point of view, or do I rashly make judgments instead of investigating the truth? Do I remember that they are made in His image and they in the work of my hands? Maybe it's stuff like don't hit, take turns, don't take without asking, don't accuse them of things they didn't do. Maybe there are other things we need to add. Do I act as if I believe that He is Jehovah? Do I believe that it's enough that He understands, and can I be at peace if I do not understand? And at this point, I had so many slides, it stopped working on me, so you're going to have to fill in the rest of them. But do I believe that He will protect me, that He will provide for me? Do I believe that He is the judge of the earth and He knows the truth and the people around me may not? And what is the relationship between the two columns? I've given you my input as to what I think some of it is. I think a lot of the column about loving people is like a thermometer, and it's saying, you know, if you're not doing this one right, that just shows that you have a problem over here. And a very simple spreadsheet that does not cover everything that we've talked about, but it kind of summarizes some of the things that we've said, is that the relationship to me between the first row and this I am Jehovah, obviously this was written a while ago, I'm sorry, I forgot to change that, and murder, is this is our physical life. We are made in His image, and if we are not honoring Him and knowing that He owns us and we are in covenant with Him, instead of looking at things from His point of view, we will look at things from our point of view, and we will be selfish and self-centered. And that's a warning sign that we're going to see some of the things that He is calling murder in our lives. And we better get back to the root, which is knowing who He is and whose we are in Him, and get back to that root and ask Him to plant in us the truth that He and He alone is Jehovah, and the only allegiance we owe to anybody is to Him. The second one is no other Elohim, and committing adultery is about family life and taking care of the people around us who don't have family. And if we do not, the warning is lust of the flesh and pride of life, but also having that arrogance to treat the people around us as if they are here for our use and to be machines to get done what we want to have done, and not looking at them as He looks at them, but looking at them, how can I use them? What can I get out of them? And if that's our thought, it's because our work, the work of our hands, something else has become our Elohim, and we need to get to the root of that. Do not take my name in vain, and do not steal have a lot to do with our economic lives, which is, I believe, part in that society especially, the ox and the donkey were critical for helping them do the work and sustain physical life. And I think that's one of the reasons they're so important. It has to do with greed and the lust of our eyes. We want more. We want to define what we need and not trust him to provide what he needs, because his name is his plan, it's his provision, it is our strong tower, it is everything we need. And if we're thinking about stealing and envying something somebody else has, it's because we don't know the power of his name and bearing his name and carrying his name and knowing that everything he has for us is good. And the last one, we talked about a fair amount about truth and justice in the social life, that if we are not bearing a true witness of our covenant with him, then it will be, if we have fear of man, it will be very easy to fall into supporting what the society says when they're just being a mob and following the leader. And again, there are so many more questions to ask. This is just a very, very, very rough kind of relationship that I made. The bottom line is his word is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit and of the joints and marrow, and it's a discerner of the thoughts and intents of our heart. It doesn't matter if we obey. It's the reason we're obeying is so that somebody will like us, or we want them to think that we're spiritual so that we can get them to do something for us. It's the thoughts and intents of our heart that his word will deal with. And it is this covenant that addresses those in ways that are so familiar to us we forget and we don't even recognize. This covenant addresses how we identify and define ourselves in every aspect of our lives and relationships. It touches on the lies that we have believed, which we really haven't had time to cover because that's like in round 4. And it uncovers the emotions that display them. And this covenant is his nature. It is his pure love revealed. And knowing that, and knowing who we are, how can it be that he still desires us? And yet this covenant is how we became his. And he still wants to rejoice over us as a bridegroom rejoices over the bride. And we're soon going to be celebrating this covenant at Sinai was written in stone. And this covenant with the giving of his spirit is written on our hearts. It is more than what it is written. It is deeper than we know. He is turning this. He made us out of the dust of the earth. He is turning this into this. And this bride is to be clean and mature. That means that we need to get our boots on, because there's digging to do. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, and it's the honor of kings to search out a matter. And we've only touched on a couple little chapters. His whole word is filled with this stuff. And we will only get there if his word washes through us so that he can sanctify us and cleanse us and present us to himself as his glorious bride, not having spot or wrinkle, holy and without blemish. And in turning this into this, it means we need to get our boots on, because boot camp's coming. so that we can learn to count it all joy no matter what happens, because he is using everything that comes into our lives to make us pure, to make us perfect and mature, to make us entire and complete and wanting nothing, that we might be his own. So next week, rejoice in this covenant in a way that you haven't rejoiced before. May you daily rejoice that he has called us to be his own. May we continue to grow in him. May we continue to read his word that he might clean us. May we continue to dig deep. May we learn to count all those trials and tribulations as joy, because we know the end result, because we know we are his, and he's turning us into his bride. May he work in us today and every day to draw us closer to him. And that's it. Joe, I can't hear you.
You're moving your mouth. I can't hear you, buddy.
Randy muted me.
My bad.
Sorry, my bad. I was going to ask Sal, would you like to close in prayer before we start? I have one hand up, I see. Would you like to close in prayer? Because it's 4:45 and we've already got a long video here already. So I'm going to shut it down soon. Okay?
Okay. Oh, Father, Jehovah, we just thank you so much that you love us, that you're patient with us and kind, that you draw us to yourself, that you chose us to be your own. Father, may we have hearts to read your word, that your word might cleanse us. Father, may we have hearts to view our lives as you do, that we might walk in joy regardless of what comes our way, knowing that you are making us into everything you created us to be, that we might be the image of your Son, that we might be your spotless bride. Father, be with us this week. Help us to love you. Help us to love those around you. Father, may your love flow through us and draw those around you, around us. Draw them to you, that they might desire you and know that you love them and desire them as well. Father, help us to prepare for the coming feasts. Help us to know more deeply your love for us. May it invade every fiber of our being. May we love you wholly. In the name of your precious Son, Yahshua, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Well, Sal, on behalf of everybody here, I got to thank you. That was awesome. And we've already got a couple requests, maybe more, for you to come back and finish this and go in deeper where you wanted to go. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay. So let me take one. I see, Gary, you got your hand up. Go ahead. And if there's no more, I'm going to end the video after that.
I just wanted to mention that in Exodus 21, verses 1 through 6, just kept coming into my heart. Could be a picture of Sabbath rest as well, because a slave has come in, he's worked for 6 years, And even with wife and children, the decision was made, do I go out as a free man or do I stay? And he chose to stay with his master. And in the process of doing that, the master pierced his ear and put an awl there. And then the decision was made to serve him permanently. I just know in our heart that as we learn more and more about Yehovah and all that he's doing in us, that we arrive at a point in our life where we are at rest in him, and the things that occur in his word that are new revelation, like today, for example, bring an increasing peace in our relationship with him. So maybe I didn't say that quite correctly, but hope you can understand.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up there. Randy, you got any more?
No, sir.
Okay, next weekend is Shavuot. We have, I believe, is it Stephen? Randy, help me out. Stephen Spikeman on Shabbat. If we can get him to work his computer.
Correct. He was on for most of the day today, but yes, sir. He is up next.
Okay, and then I'm going to be teaching Shavuot morning, and if time pervades, Frank Smith is going to be teaching in the afternoon. So that's the plan for next weekend. And we're going to start Shavuot at 9 a.m. Eastern time, and possibly 3 p.m. In the afternoon. So we'll have 2 services that day. So I want to thank you all for coming. I'm going to end the meeting now. We can still talk for a little bit. What do I do here? Hit that button. No?